Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, much better vibe than last week as the Mets take a series against the Reds, and they stay hot with a scary win in the opener over Atlanta with 3 games left to go. Joe and I will recap the injuries, who's hot, who's not, and of course, we'll go down on the farm to talk about Calvin Ziegler's great performance to kick off the minor league season. And as always, we will recap our scoreboard and answer your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel where you can leave your questions or wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today and subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. If you'd like to drop us a review, leave a mailbag question with the review, and it will take top priority. Watch us on YouTube and also drop your mailbag questions there in the comments under the show as well. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. Joe, much better mood this week. The Mets take a series in Cincinnati they really could have swept. The middle game gets away from them, of course, and then they win the opener down in Atlanta, which was a thriller, a scary game. Everybody was on edge till the very, very last out. The balls were hit hard off of Jorge Lopez, but all outs count the same. Joe, welcome back, not only from a week since we last recorded, but your weekend at Wrestlemania. How are we right now?
Oh, we're flying high. Cody Rhodes finished his story. Absolutely love pro wrestling, so that was a fun weekend, but now we're back to talk some Mets, and like you said, Connor, a much better vibe than last week's show, where I kicked off the show saying, not ideal. And not that the Mets had an ideal week this week, but obviously significantly better.
And I think the easiest way to get right into what's happened is as the rotation turns, because I don't want to say the story has been the pitching, but it feels like a lot of the story is who's hitting and who's not. But in the background, the pitching has been solid. It's given the Mets a chance to win games. There hasn't been, it feels like, that start where, or multiple starts, a string of starts where it's 6 innings, shutout ball, a lot of strikeouts. It's, obviously Manaea's first start. He looked really, really good. I think he came back down to earth a little bit in his second start, but still gave the Mets a chance to win. And it feels like that's been much of the theme. I know Julio Teheran's start with the Mets did not go long. They were in a hole. Credit to the Mets. It was their gutsiest win of the year, bouncing back in that one. But it feels like the rest of the cast of characters, especially when you look at Quintana, which we know who he is at this point, Jose Butto, who's really, really trying to have a breakout year this season. It feels like the pitching, which has a lot of question marks, had a lot of question marks coming into the season, and we'll include the bullpen in that as well, is at least giving this team a chance.
When we were previewing this season, we said the Mets are going to hit, which obviously that's been a little up and down so far through the first 10 games. And we said the starting pitching just can't ruin the season for them. And through just 10 games, 2.76 ERA from the Mets starting pitchers. They're averaging basically 5 innings to start. It's 49 innings, across the 10 games. So just about 5 innings per start, which ideally you're getting more. You would like to be closer to 6 on average. But when you look at Sean Manaea, like you say, he came back down to earth a little bit, but still was able to get out of jams. And obviously his stuff has looked good so far. I think the starting pitching, it's not going to be the strong suit of this Mets team throughout the season. But in a time where the bats have been a little bit up and down, oddly, the starting pitching has kind of been one of the more reliable parts of the team.
It has, because at least you nailed it. When you look at the ERA, it's not just giving them a chance to win. It's good. When you look at the volume of innings or lack thereof, that's an issue. Now, let's be fair. It's the start of the season. They are not going to ride a lot of guys past 100 pitches. They are really not going to wear guys out because it's a long baseball season and you need your arms to be healthy and you want them on the mound in August and September. But at the same time, I think some of the long-standing questions with these guys is if they have the ability to work deeper into games. So that will be something that hopefully they can grow into throughout the season. And when you look at the bullpen, I think it's been a lot of what we expected so far. Edwin Diaz looks like Edwin Diaz. We know this team, for the most part, can lean on their high leverage guys like Brooks Raley. Jorge Lopez in the Atlanta game, I mean, every ball was absolutely smoked, but there's two things to be fair here because Jorge Lopez has already pitched quite a bit this season. I believe he's already pitched in 6 games, and he's been completely fine. That Atlanta's going to do that to a lot of pitchers. Let's just be real. Unless you're one of the best closers on the planet in Edwin Diaz where you just miss bats, if they make contact against you, especially at that ballpark, it feels like they are a juggernaut. And you just got to hope that, and this goes back to, I know it's a small sample size, but Stern's philosophy of defense to close out games, the acquisition of Tyrone Taylor, he makes one of the best catches of the season. You look at how Starling Marte has moved out in the outfield. And sure, he's looking like a guy that, he's in his mid-30s, but he still has speed and he still knows how to track. So I think when it comes down to it, the Mets purposely have gloves at the end of the game that can make plays when their high-leverage strikeout relievers are not on the mound. And then also, Joe, it's no surprise. I mean, the Mets have had to, with all the games they've played in a crunch, they've had to lean on names that, how often on this show do we talk about Yohan Ramirez, Reed Garrett? I mean, we do talk about a guy like Jake Diekman, but Cole Sussler, like, this is the story of the Mets right now, is juggling the roster game and finding guys that can give them 2 or 3 innings on any given night.
The Mets don't win that game against the Braves without Reed Garrett, so big shout out to Reed Garrett. Absolutely came in, and he's shoved in his couple outings so far. And this is a guy that historically, he's always thrown hard, but he's never gotten results, not at the major league level, and certainly struggled to get results even in the upper minors. So maybe this is something where you ride him as long as the results stay, but the stuff has looked fantastic. So big shout out to Reed Garrett. And we're also seeing the flexibility of David Stearns, where Michael Tonkin blows a couple extra inning games, gone. Today he was traded to the Twins for cash. Yohan Ramirez throws at Rhys Hoskins, then pitches bad. He gets designated for assignment. And,
pitches a lot.
Yeah, pitches a lot and then just goes. And Julio Teheran also was designated for assignment here on Tuesday. And Dedniel Nunez getting the call-up, which pretty fun story. He was a Met signing back in, I believe, 2016. He made his professional debut in 2017. And he was a Rule 5 pick by the Giants in 2020, was having a dominant spring and was going to make the 2021 Giants team, got Tommy John surgery, missed a season, was returned to the Mets, and now he's making his way to the Major League roster to presumably make his Major League debut as they just try to navigate this 15-game and 14-day stretch that they're on. They just need relievers to get through it. So they're battling is what I would say for the bullpen, where they're working 2 out of 3 days, 3 out of 4 days, and then they need a day off.
Right. I mean, and this is going to be the case of how the season goes when, you have these crunches, you've already had a doubleheader, and the Mets have played. The funny thing is, Joe, in all of this, it feels like the Mets have played a lot of close games already. It doesn't feel like the Mets have had many of those days where, hey, we're up 9-2, ride this guy for 3 innings. Hey, we're losing 9-2. Ride this guy for 3 innings. Like, they just haven't had a lot of games like that where, I mean, you look at even the game they lost to Cincinnati, like the spot they were in with not having a ton of flexibility with relief help that day as well. And then you look at the first game against Atlanta where, I mean, on the edge of our seat because they couldn't go to their big guns as well. It's not just a Mets issue. This just happens in baseball when the weather doesn't go your way and you play in some close games. It's the reality of the sport right now. Look at all the pitching injuries going on in baseball. You need to be really, really delicate with these guys that throw really hard, throw with a lot of velocity. All right, let's get into the offense because there's just a lot to unpack here right now, Joe. I'm going to be honest with you. This is not the way I don't think anybody saw the season starting, where the guys that we've had no questions about through the very early portion of the season are Brett Baty, Francisco Alvarez, which, listen, as high as we were on Alvarez, I mean, to just think he could be one of the most consistent and best hitters on the team out of the gate was even on a team with Francisco Lindor, Jeff McNeil, Pete Alonso, and Brandon Nimmo. Even that was a little rich at times. Marte has looked closer to Starling Marte, and that's a really, really big sign for this team. But on the flip side of it, besides the 2 home runs, Pete Alonso does not look good. Jeff McNeil, by far the most concerning to me, which might surprise people because Francisco Lindor has struggled the most out of everybody right now. He has a 383 OPS. That's an unheard of number. Lindor is not only traditionally the slow starter, but a guy that when things are going bad, they go really bad. And then when things go good, you cannot get the guy out because he hits for power. So I don't worry about Francisco Lindor in the capacity that I worry about McNeil, which people might be shocked by that. But with McNeil, it's just, Joe, you start to wonder, you said it best, I believe, on a couple episodes ago. McNeil is somebody that traditionally will not hit for power. He's not a base stealer, so he has to hit for contact. I think you actually set the number, like you really want him hitting above 280 or closer to 300 to be effective. That's why I worry the most about McNeil in this situation, because in reality, Alonso's a power hitter. The ebbs and flows of a power hitter, it's just the nature of it, and Pete will be fine. Lindor, he's a slow starter. This has been really, really rough, and it's got to get better. I am not excusing him from that at all. Lindor is going to be fine. And I'm not saying McNeil's not going to be fine, but it just feels like, especially with how they've treated him, dropping him in the lineup, this is the one to watch the most closely, as small as the sample size is.
That's absolutely the one to watch most closely. When you look at Lindor and Alonso, I know that is the conversation because Francisco Lindor is a $341 million guy. Pete Alonso is the face of the franchise, trying to have a contract year before free agency. Those guys are going to be just fine. I don't think they warrant on April 9th this really deep dive into necessarily what they're doing. But Jeff McNeil is one that does because, Connor, like I said a couple weeks ago, and you just pointed out, he is someone that needs to, hit for average. He needs to get on base. And in the early going, he's not even really hitting the ball hard. He's not having the kind of at-bats that Jeff McNeil of 2 years ago would have. So I would say Jeff McNeil right now, moving him down in the order, I think makes a lot of sense. And maybe it's something where you take a little bit of the pressure off him and kind of get him back in the mode. Because much like you were talking about with Lindor, McNeil's the kind of guy that it feels like the hits come in bunches. Like when he's going, you really can't get him out. He'll, hit you 2 hits and a walk or 3 hits or 4 hits. That's the kind of hitter that McNeil can be. And the Mets really need him to turn more into that. But on the positive side, how confident does Brett Baty look right now, not just at the plate, but in the field? I mean, we talked about this throughout the spring and, throughout the winter about kind of the lack of confidence that a lot of people had in Baty and questions surrounding everything. And, I don't know if it was that home run off Milner there in Milwaukee that just hit something in his head. And sometimes confidence, that's what will drive you. And Baty's having good professional at bats. He looks perfectly solid at third, turning double plays. Just big shout out, I think, to Brett Baty for, being someone that a lot of fans and people in the media almost wanted to rule out of being any good. And we forget that just basically a year ago, Brett Baty was a top 20 prospect in baseball.
I think that's a really good point. When you look at Baty, he is a guy that, to be honest with you, it's very few and far between points in his baseball life that he's really, really struggled, right? I mean, that's the thing. He was an older high schooler. He devoured high school pitching. When you look at, yes, you could argue the 42 games he had in Kingsport as a 19-year-old in 2019 when he hit 222, but he still had an OPS a little under 800. So he was still hitting home runs and getting on base. And then when you look at, his production in Brooklyn, I mean, a 911 OPS in 2021. When you look at 2022, he had a 950 OPS in Binghamton, and then he goes up to Syracuse. He obviously hit in Syracuse. He's just not a guy that has hit a wall at a level yet. And guess where people hit their wall? The major leagues. It's the biggest gap. It's a jarring gap in what you are seeing. So writing off Baty for having a tough 2023 season as a 23-year-old, I get the concern. We had the concerns, and the concerns are still there. Brett Baty's not a sure thing.
No,
But
not out of the woods yet.
No, we're not. But Joe, you nailed it. The confidence and looking like the player that he's always been throughout the minor leagues and why he was drafted that high is really, really promising. I mean, this was a dude that was taken 12th overall in the MLB draft. There is significant talent there. I think the defense is, when you have confidence from your glove carrying over to your bat, that is something that there's no price on that. And it's really, really helped Baty. I love the emotion that he plays with. And then you get into some of the unsung heroes. Joe, I mean, Tyrone Taylor right now, to his credit, he has had some big hits. He hasn't been a nothing at the plate when a lot of guys have been a nothing at the plate. DJ Stewart is a guy that the Mets literally couldn't get anything from. And then he hits a big home run in Atlanta. Now, we know the writing on the wall. DJ Stewart is a placeholder for JD Martinez, and the Mets were always going to kind of ride out this 2-week stretch with DJ Stewart until JD gets here. They were going to be like, hey, we need Mark Vientos for 2 games. Like, that's not something I don't think the Mets want to do. So it's good for Stewart to get that home run, but I don't think it really changes the prospects moving forward, which is why it's so big to get these wins now. Because if JD Martinez gets here in a week and the Mets are scratching and clawing to be around 500, and then you just drop him in the middle of the lineup, when that spot in the order was typically the 9 hole where you were getting literally nothing from, then it starts to kind of change the dynamic of an offense that really needs a shot in the arm for the big producers in the top 5 spots.
I've been very vocal on this show that I thought Mark Vientos should have been on this team over DJ Stewart. And, I understood their reasoning, but I thought Vientos gave them a better opportunity for whatever amount of time it would take for JD Martinez to be ready. And obviously he has not arrived yet. And DJ Stewart, huge home run in Atlanta. And, that's the kind of thing that maybe the Mets consider when JD Martinez is ready. Do they option DJ Stewart, or do they, get rid of someone like a Zach Short and knock him off the roster? He hasn't played much, and is that extra backup defensive infielder more important than, maybe the potential home run power that DJ Stewart has coming off the bench? So, big spot for him. Certainly, the Mets hadn't gotten almost literally anything out of him. So having him come up in a spot of that crazy game in Atlanta and hit the home run that he did, hopefully that is much like we were just talking about with Baty and the confidence. Maybe that home run will get DJ Stewart back into the mindset that he had in August, when he was basically like Barry Bonds for 3 weeks and no one could get him out.
Right. And, you bring up Short. He hasn't played a lot. I'll say this is just one man's opinion. I like Zach Short's bat better than Joey Wendell right now. I just don't. Joey Wendell doesn't have a hit, and he's gotten some time. And I know he's a veteran. I know they signed him pretty early in free agency for a reason. He can play a lot of spots. My thinking is, if you are going to move on from one of the defensive replacements, it'll be interesting to see how the Mets ultimately view it between those two. If they decide to keep Stewart up here, Stewart has to really have one hell of a week. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. He's got to help them at least split the Atlanta series for that argument to be made. And he's got the opportunity to do it. So before we close up on the week that was, some pitching injuries here, Joe. I mean, this is the inevitable. We've been waiting for Senga to get back. That wait's going to obviously continue. Tyler McGill, unfortunately, this has kind of been a bit of a story of his career so far. A guy that traditionally doesn't work deep into games. And he's dealing with what we think will be a short IL stint right now, though. How do you kind of see the Mets handling this rotation where they sign Tehran, he starts, they designate him for assignment. We'll see how that plays out. It's weird to me that, at this point, how do you even send Buto down when you're talking about guys that deserve the opportunity here? How do you see the Mets kind of handling their starting rotation going forward?
So Buto will come back up. So when Buto started in a doubleheader, he wasn't actually added to the roster because he
Right. It
wasn't
was
allowed
like
to.
that
So
filler
he's
kind of.
he's the 27th man that
Yeah.
MLB allows you to have for a doubleheader. So
He
he
hasn't
basically
missed the start
started.
yet.
He has not missed the start, and it sounds as if he's going to be back this weekend, taking the spot in the rotation that Julio Teheran filled. And Tyler McGill, I believe, is throwing or starting throwing, so he is on the mend. It was clearly a short-term type of thing. But Connor, how crazy is this? All things considered, we've talked about the Mets and the health that they've had, throughout spring training and frankly into the season. There still hasn't been, that big thing. Look at all the big pitching injuries throughout the sport.
I know.
It is mind-blowing how many of these pitchers. I mean, Shane Bieber, Tommy John, Spencer Strider could be looking at another Tommy John surgery. Framber Valdez had elbow. The Nationals put Josiah Gray on the IL with a flexor strain. What's happening with pitchers right now is it's just crazy, and it makes me rethink strategies going forward. I can't even imagine investing a ton of money into a starting pitcher nowadays.
No, it's hard, right? Because you look at the volatility of you getting enough out of the contract, right? Because if a guy goes down with Tommy John, it's not just, hey, the season's over, right? How we look at an ACL in football
Right.
there, where it's like, well, during the offseason, he's going to be able to recover and he'll be back for the start of next year. There is such a long-term recovery that it's going to be fascinating, Joe, because we always talk about the pitching market for next year. Like Corbin Burns, right? A guy like Corbin Burns entering the market. You're just looking at it and thinking, man, we would love to just sign a guy like this, not give up any compensation, and we just drop him at the top of our rotation. But like you said, it enhances the argument. To be fair to the Mets, this has been the Mets thinking now for the last 2 years. They're not there yet because the guys need to stay on the trajectory. They're not all ready to go. But developing quantity, the volume of arms in the system is the elixir to this problem. Like, that's what people don't want to say, right? Everybody is looking at the issue, and I want your thoughts on this, Joe, but I look at the issue, and this is a little harsh because these are human beings with real careers and real livelihood. If this is how the sport has gone, that guys are trying to throw 100 miles an hour, I don't know the pitch. Sure, the pitch clock might not help. This has been happening before the pitch clock, okay? So if this is where the sport has gone and how the development of pitching is being taught, I don't think the solution is that, hey, we got to change all of that to keep these guys healthy. I think the solution is, hey, we need to have expectations that we're going to need 9 to 10 guys this year that can make major league starts. And I'm not talking about what the Mets did with Julio Teheran, where they needed somebody to pitch. And it's like, can we get 3 innings and see how this goes? I'm talking about guys that you go, we think this is a major league caliber starter for us this year. Because I don't think this is going away. I mean, you nailed it with all of the names that are dealing with this now. Spencer Strider's already had Tommy John before. We haven't gotten confirmation that he'll need it again. That sounds like it's going to take the entire week for that update. Garrett Cole is a guy that it's a little unclear exactly how that road will go. He's going to try to work his way back for this season. But the overall point is, Joe, not only the level of starter that this is happening to, the volume of starters that this is happening to, I think for me, I look at it and go, it changes my philosophy towards roster building because I don't have the answers of how pitching development limits these injuries happening going forward.
It's really hard because nowadays, and we're guilty of it. The media is guilty of it as well. We talk about spin rates and velocity and induced vertical break and all these things. Now that everything can be quantified, and it's quantified to the point of if you do this, that's a good number, and major league teams will have attention on you. Kids growing up are trying to do that. That is the nature of it. And, as batters get more advanced as well, it's really hard to try to scale back pitchers. It's really hard to be like, let's just start trying to throw 90 instead of 97. You can't really do that.
And the ball leaves the ballpark and you're not in the league anymore.
Exactly. So what I think, just my looking ahead years from now, I think the day of the 200 inning starting pitcher is going to go away soon. I think the day of a 5-man rotation is going to go away soon. I think you're going to be moving into 6-man rotations. You're going to be targeting like 160 innings, 165 innings a year from pitchers. And you're going to go in quantity, like you said, Connor, quantity of starting pitching that you could call up and cycle in and cycle out. And also, relievers that can go multiple innings are going to be valuable. The 1-inning reliever, I think, is something that is going to decrease in value as we continue forward in a world where you're not going to have, many. I'm sure there'll always be exceptions to the rule, but you're not going to have many 215 inning, type of starters anymore. I think that's where the game is trending, where it's more, if you're going to be doing max effort and max velocity and max spin rate and all this stuff on your arm, you're going to need to limit your innings. That's what it's going to be. It's going to be max effort for shorter outings and more relievers to come in that could fill those gaps of, plugging the innings.
You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. Joe, let's go down on the farm. We got to talk about Calvin Ziegler. This is a big player to watch in 2024, obviously coming off a year where he was dealing with injuries, or years with injuries. Listen, if you want to see Ziegler and other interesting arms in the Brooklyn rotation like Nolan McLean and Brandon Sproat, the Cyclone season has begun. For schedule, tickets, and full details, visit brooklyncyclones.com. So, Joe, with Ziegler, I remember when he was drafted, the first thing you said to me was the spin rate, the stuff. I mean, it is in a pretty unique stratosphere. And if he's a guy that's able to tap into this stuff, and we were at the time wondering, hey, is he going to be a reliever? Is he going to be a starter? We know the Mets' philosophy is try to keep guys starters in the minor leagues and see what happens. With Ziegler, Joe, it was great, but no surprise to see that strikeout stuff really play right out of the gate this year.
Not surprising at all. And like you said at the top of the show, I was at Wrestlemania, so I didn't get to watch Calvin Ziegler's first start, but it was 4 perfect innings, which that's the key. No walks in that outing and 9 strikeouts across 4 innings. But going back to spring training, his velocity was up. It was up to 98 miles an hour. He still got that hammer curve and working on a cutter. So when you look at Ziegler, it's, you go back to last year, we were really excited about what Calvin Ziegler could bring back in 2023. Then he had surgery for bone chips in his elbow. So took care of that. And while he was rehabbing to get back on the mound, tore his quad. So he ended up missing the whole season except for 1 inning he was able to get into for low A St. Lucie. But the Mets are still incredibly high on Ziegler, who's inside of my top 20 prospects in the system. And obviously a good start to a season there for Brooklyn. And as you mentioned in that read for the Cyclones are a real fun team this year, especially on the pitching side. Here, as we record on Tuesday, Brandon Sproat will make his debut tonight for the Cyclones. I believe it's their home opener. So, yeah, you definitely want to make your way to Coney Island to see some of the arms that the Mets have coming through.
It's great that every time we do Down on the Farm and we talk about a prospect at a different level, it always feels like we could piggyback the combo with, but also watch this guy, and also watch this guy. Get out to a game at Brooklyn. Get out to a game at Binghamton. Get to a game at Syracuse. There's just talent throughout every level of the system that is so pivotal and so vital to the Mets organization right now. All right, Joe, let's get into the scoreboard predictions from last week. I got to hand it to you. You were kind of Mr. Optimistic last week, and I was a little doubtful. So let's recap. The over-under push was set at 2 for how many home runs Pete Alonso will hit in the next 6 games. We both said push. He only hit 1. No points awarded to either. Over-under push was set at 1 for how many home runs Francisco Alvarez will hit in the next 6 games. Joe, you went under. I went push. Joe, you get the point. Alvarez did not hit a home run throughout that 6-game stretch. Over-under push was set at 5 for how many innings Adrian Hauser pitched in his first start. Joe, you pushed. I went over. 5 plus is how Jeff ruled
under protest. This is under protest.
He gave me the point. He said, fight all you want, Joe, you lose. So sorry, Joe. That is a tough way to go
You
out.
know what? You know what? This is for the listeners. I want you to leave comments on the video here on YouTube if you're watching. I want you to send us things on Twitter so I could show Jeff that I was right. The over-under of innings was 5. If you look at the box score, Hauser threw 5.0. Yes, he did throw to a couple batters, so he did get 5 plus. So either A, we need Jeff to reverse this decision, or we need Jeff to change the verbiage of these questions going forward.
That's a tough one for you, Joe, but I'll take all the points I can get. It's
Yes.
hard out here. Over under push set at 3. How many errors for the Mets in the next 6 games? They had 5. We both said under. So that's where our optimism did not help us. No points awarded. Some tough play out there for the Mets in the field at times. Over under push set at 3 for how many wins for the Mets in the next 6 games? Joe, I got to give you credit. You said over. I went under. The Mets had 4 wins in 6 games. Mets are back on track. 1 point to Joe. You lead the season series 2-1. So let's jump right into it. Because you lead, I will give you the first answer for our first one, where we have a 7-pack for 7 games. 3 against the Braves, 3 against the Royals, 1 against those red-hot Pittsburgh Pirates. Over-under push set at 2 for Pete Alonso home runs, Joe.
I'm going to go back to the well that didn't work last week. I'm going to say push. He'll hit a couple. He's got to get into that power stroke here soon enough. Like, he's not going to be, hardly hitting home runs for too long.
I'm with you, but I'm going to go over. I think Alonso, this is the week where that green light comes on. He could have a game where he hits 2, and then you only need 1 in the other 6 games. I'll say Alonso gets over the 2 mark. Over-under push set at 1 for Brett Baty home runs. I think I'm actually going to go with an under here, Joe. I think Baty right now is very confident in just putting the ball in play. He's not pressing for the long ball. We know the kind of strength he has where he could just hit a home run without trying to truly swing over the fences. But I'll go under here for Baty, but I still think his bat will continue to be very capable at this level. What do you think?
I'll go under as well. And I think that was a great point you just made there, Connor, that I want Brett Baty to be focusing on hitting line drives. He's hit grounders up the middle too, but I want him focused on hitting line drives. And he's a big, strong kid that as he keeps building that confidence, he'll get just a little under one of those line drives and it'll be gone. But I'll go under for this week as well.
So the next one is over-under pushes at 5 for Francisco Lindor hits. Lindor on the season right now, I believe, only has 3. So he would really have to turn this thing around, Joe. He's got 7 games to do it. What do you do with this number?
I'm going to go over, and I'm not going to get the Connor shocked face, it looks like, that I got last week when I said over on Mets wins. But Francisco Lindor is just far too good of a baseball player. I know he's a historical slow starter, but he's far too good of a baseball player to have an OPS under 400. So it's got to get going, and I know there is a movement on Mets Twitter that Steve Cohen kind of spearheaded a little bit about let's cheer Francisco Lindor. And we talked about this on the podcast last week or the week before, where we mentioned the Phillies, and Steve Cohen mentioned the Phillies as well as something that they did for Alec Bohm. So we'll see if Met fans can do that for Lindor when they get back to Citi Field. Give me the over on hits.
I'll go over as well, simply because this is 7 games. Lindor plays every day. Even if he had 6 hits, that doesn't mean he's turned this thing around. That just means that he's playing below average to what he is. So the number here, and he's been bad, where the number is a very fair market, but it's just too low for the kind of player he is. I'll go over as well. Even if he had 6 hits, Joe, that's not a good week for Francisco Lindor across 7 games, but it's still above the number. All right, the next one, the number for Mets stolen bases is set at 3. I think I'm going to go over here. I'm actually surprised with the lack of running besides Marte right now, but to be fair, Lindor is not ever getting on base, and he had 30 plus steals last year. Marte is back to stealing bases again. So I think when it comes down to it, that's a big difference in this one right now. The Mets don't really, Tyrone Taylor can run. It doesn't feel like the Mets have that guy on the bench that you go, oh man, in a pinch run situation, he just runs around the bases. But this is a really low number, so I'll go over 3.
Yeah, there's no Terrence Gore on this bench that's just hanging out or ready to run and steal some bags. I'll push. I think Marte, like you said, has turned down a bit. He had the two stolen base game. Nimmo has even tried a couple, so there's a little bit of running going on, but not enough for me to feel confident that they'll be above 3.
Over under push is at 9 for Mets stolen bases against. They've surrendered 18 in 10 games so far, Joe. Man, what do you do with this one? It's not been pretty. And I will advocate, I don't think it has anything to do with Alvarez right now.
No, I think it's largely on the pitchers. I'll go under because it's hard to imagine that they're going to have this level of sustainable, like be this sustainable in allowing base runners to steal. So I'll go under 9, and I still think, like you said, Connor Alvarez. I don't think his throwing is a huge problem. They need to continue to work with these pitchers.
I'll go over. Listen, the Braves have a couple guys that can just run around the bases. You get a young Royals team and then one with the Pirates. I think it's a problem with the Mets pitchers right now, and that's not something you could fix to me. And Narvaez is going to have to play at least one of these 7 games. It's been very, very vulnerable to the steal. All right, over-under push is at 2 for Mets starters going at least 6 innings. I will push on this, Joe. I think the Mets could have, out of 2 of these 7 games, they can get a starter to get that 6 innings mark, but I would not feel confident in the over.
Yeah, I'm gonna push as well. It's hard to see 3 of them happening because it's a lot of
Who
5
is that?
inning
Yeah,
Quintana. Like
right.
Quintana can go 6 a
Severino
couple of
can do
times.
it.
Yeah, Severino could, but I'll join you. I'll push, and I think you'll see a lot of 5 and a third, 5 and 2/3, and hopefully less of those 3 that Julio Teheran gave.
Over under push, Joe. The big one for you. Mets wins. The number is set at 4.
I'm not going to go over. I'm not going to go 5 and what was it, 5 and 2?
5 and 7. Yeah.
I will go. I'll push. I'll say they'll go 4-3, so just over 500, which puts them right in position to be a game under 500. Which, as we look ahead, 500 is a good number to target.
I'm going to tell you on that one and go with a push as well. If the Mets play how we think this team is capable of playing, 4 wins with, listen, 3 against Atlanta, it's going to be really tough. If the Mets split with Atlanta, you take that and run before you play Kansas City and Pittsburgh. So 4 wins. The Mets have turned around some of their shortcomings, but they still have a long ways to go. Let's get into the mailbag. A couple of YouTube questions here. This one from Nick Pauly. Do you think there comes a day when Lindor should hit exclusively right-handed? His bat control and plate coverage are significantly stronger since day one as a Met. In 2018, he had a 100-point difference. As he ages, he could benefit from this side with better technique. Joe, this has been this is not the first year this has been a talking point. I think it came back up because Lindor is hitting under 100 right now, and also I don't think this is an unfair question. It is interesting how, to me, just the eye test, how different of a hitter Lindor looks compared to the left side and right side of the plate.
So he's a natural right-handed hitter. So
yes, that's
that
correct.
looks more natural. And, Lindor has a much more level plane when he's swinging right-handed. The left-handed swing is a little more uppercut, and you tend to see him actually turn into power as the summer goes along from the left side. I think historically, I believe I looked it up just yesterday. I think it's like for his career, 800 OPS versus right-handed pitchers, and I think 830 or so.
837.
Again, yeah, 837. So there is a difference, but I think people are almost acting as if he's a horrendous left-handed hitter and a really good right-handed hitter. So I don't think you're going to see anytime soon Lindor give up switch hitting. I think there is an advantage to it. And as the summer goes along, you're going to see him have some great at-bats as a left-handed hitter. I could already go back to the game against the Yankees. What was it, 2 years ago? The 3 home run game or 2 home run game, whatever it was, from
3 home runs,
the left side, 3 home runs. So from the left side, it's a bit more of an uppercut swing, which I think leads to a lot more inconsistency than the flat swing that he has from the right side. So I don't think he's given up hitting left-handed, but I would agree with kind of the sentiment that his right-handed swing is better.
It's tricky, right? Because in 2022, Lindor had a 789 OPS as a right-handed hitter, against righties, so as a left-handed hitter. and he had a 784 OPS as a right-handed hitter. So he was actually better as a left-handed hitter in 2022. Why it's ingrained in the Mets fan head, to be fair, is last year against righties, I mean, it was not even close. It was a 758 OPS versus 916. He killed lefties from the right side of the plate. So it's a mixed bag where 2022, it was very beneficial for him to be a switch hitter, where he was actually better as a left-handed hitter. Last year, there was a jarring difference of how much better he was as a right-handed hitter. So that's why it's now, or if it bleeds into this year, I get why people are bringing it up. All right, Met fan 3105 on YouTube. Sneak peek at the City Connect jerseys, purple. What are your thoughts?
I'm interested to see how it goes. My hope, and I don't know what color the jerseys are going to be. Maybe it's black with some purple.
Like
maybe
trim.
It's gray. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the main color of the jersey is going to be, because I hope it's not purple. Let's start with that. I don't want the base color of the jersey to be
with purple pants or green pants and go full Barney.
Oh God, no.
If
Please,
Nike
no.
does that to the Mets, I will. Well, one, I won't buy it.
Yeah.
Two, it's gonna be tough. But go on, Joe, and then I'll give you my thoughts.
I'm hopeful it's either a black or gray base, and I would love. I don't know if this is possible, but I would love if the numbers were like the 7 train subway, where it's white numbers inside of the purple circle. If they're able to pull that off, I think that would really speak to kind of the Queens, which is the whole premise of the City Connect.
So I'm with you totally. I think the thing I'm a little hung up on is, one, they can't be purple, the jerseys. Like, they just cannot. It would look so. And I know they've done a lot of uniforms with the City Connect series that are away from the color entirely of the team. I don't have a problem with that. When they did the marathon kind of homage to, Boston, you can go down the road of every single team. But I just think it's weird for a baseball team like the Mets that have such a good color palette that to walk out there in head-to-toe purple uniforms. Now, it's not that purple's a bad color to work with, because this could be done really well. I think where I'm a little hung up here, Joe, is the Mets have great black uniforms. I don't need another black uniform for the Mets. The Mets have great gray uniforms. So I think the way you do it is you do more of a gray, maybe a really dark gray, that it's different from what you already have. It's not a black uniform, and then you nailed it. If the purple is going to be a part of this, which it's the 7 train color, I think it's great. That's the way you do it. You do it as a background with the subway style behind the number. And then it's a totally new color that isn't in, like, yes, the Mets have gray and the Mets have black, but a darker gray in between that would look noticeably different. That's where it would be different to me. And then with just the purple and maybe black trim, like black piping on the dark gray, I think that could look like a really, really nice uniform that you look at it and go, okay, it has the City Connect feel where it doesn't feel like the Mets at all, but they are honoring something that has to do with Queens and the Mets, not New York, because you got to remember, with the Yankees involved in this too, you don't want it to be, just the Empire State Building in front of it. Or our biggest fear was that they come out in all red uniforms to honor the apple and like a green number on it. It would just look utterly ridiculous. Christmas uniforms in June. So let me know your thoughts, though, on how you deal with the color of the jerseys, because that would be how I would go about it.
Yeah, I think the dark gray is a good kind of mix, because I think you make a great point about not wanting to replicate what's in your, uniform set. Like the Mets, I think, like, they have a really good color set just generally. I think orange and blue, and I've always loved just the clean gray away jerseys. So I think kind of like a slate gray is kind of a good compromise. And, that jersey will be announced on the 19th of April for those that missed the announcement. So I am excited / nervous, because I really hope Nike does justice and the Mets don't have a City Connect jersey that I'm like, ugh, I can't believe they're wearing these again.
Right. We've followed the City Connect series pretty closely. I think there's been more hits than misses, to be honest with you, which is a credit to Nike, because it is not listen, this is not an easy task. You are trying to find something that honors where the team plays. You are trying to make it totally different than anything they've ever worn and not make it ridiculous. There are a handful that are absolutely ridiculous. There are also a handful that have been really tasteful and really cool, and it's not supposed to be traditional. So when somebody says, it doesn't look like the Mets, that's the whole point of the series.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and they're not going to wear them enough where you'll care. So yeah, that's where it stands. All right, this is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And of course, you can watch the show on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well. Thanks so much, everybody. Joe and I will be back with you next week.